All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence Learning Collaborative on Nonprofit Basics. Today, and then in our second session on January 24th, we'll be covering building a work plan. In my work with recovery community organizations, I've learned this is an essential skill that more people need to know about. It really helps with our workflow. It helps with our planning. It helps us engage our teams more deeply and delegate. Certainly as an executive director, much easier to delegate when we have a work plan in place. Could you go to the next slide? Thank you. This is just a disclaimer that funding for this initiative was made possible through a grant, SAMHSA grant, and the views expressed here today by the presenter in any materials do not necessarily reflect the official policies of the Department of Health and Human Services. And of course, if we want addiction destigmatized, we need a language that's unified. The words we use matter, and caution needs to be taken, especially when the disorders concerned are as heavily stigmatized as substance use disorders are. So we always want to refer to the person first and never describe someone as their disease or their diagnosis. And this is just a kind of our TA trail. So you can submit what we call a request for technical assistance to the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence. And different from an event like this, that's an open, broad training that a lot of people attend. Your request, you're going to work one-on-one with somebody. So you can submit your request through our website. Somebody will reach out to you and connect you to one of our team members who specializes in that area. And that team member will work with you one-to-one, and you might bring in additional consultants to deliver that request or meet your needs, provide you resources. And then at the end, you get a survey to tell us how we did. So it's a pretty cool process. Just some housekeeping for today. Today's presentation is being recorded. Please try to keep your line muted when the presenter is speaking. When you do unmute to speak, please identify yourself with your name and the area you work in. For this, you might identify the type of organization you work in. Feel free to submit questions into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat while Jamie is presenting. You will receive the slides post January 24th. So after session 2, you'll receive the slides. And we do have some homework prepared for you to do between these 2 sessions. So you'll be getting that as well. And that will come from Chris Kelly. So look for an email from Chris Kelly after today's presentation with your homework. And then, of course, at the end of the 2 sessions, we'll do we'll send out an evaluation link so you can let us know how we did. And I think this might be where I hand it over to you, Jamie.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Elzy. You can see my live picture for a second here. I'll be your facilitator today. I'm a mental health therapist, mental health clinical trainer, and mental health policy advocate. But I also have many years of experience running nonprofits as an executive director. Most recently, I was leading a statewide mental health professional development organization in the state of Washington for 3.5 years. So I have been in your shoes. I understand the craziness that is running these orgs on tight budgets, shifting landscapes, and often learning as we go, building the plane as we fly it. So really happy to be here today. I currently run my own private practice as a nonprofit leadership consultant and a coach, and am the partner of someone in long-term recovery. So feel connected to this work through my family as well. And I just really love supporting people who have a passion for change and giving them the tools and the supports that they need to make a real impact in their communities. Today, I'd love to see as many cameras on as possible. I know the slide deck will be up, but my hope is that this can be as interactive as it can be. I'd love to just be able to drop into group conversations. So being able to see your faces, even if you can't see each other's faces, really helps me. If you have a question or want to respond to a question, go ahead and click on that reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom bar, and you can do a raise hand, which will make sure that you are popped up in front of me as we're going through this. Okay. So a raise of either virtual or real hands. How many of you have mission or vision statements that have been developed or refreshed in the past 3 years? Okay, seeing quite a few hands there. I'm curious what percentage of your staff and board would be able to recite your org's mission on the spot? Do you think that they have that down? Do you have that down? Often, mission and vision statements are created and then they're placed on our website, and they might be rarely revisited by even the staff and board. And so when funding opportunities come up or special projects come up, sometimes nonprofits find themselves saying yes without looking to their mission and vision as guides for whether to say yes or no. I'm curious if any of you have ever been a part of an organization that had some mission creep, or they found themselves doing work that wasn't quite on mission, wasn't quite headed toward the vision. Maybe a funding opportunity came up, or somebody on your board was really passionate about something, or there was some expertise that had you pulled in some way. Anyone want to share an experience of mission creep, whether it's at your organization or something that you've witnessed before? That Monique, did you want to share?
Yes, I didn't really have my hand raised for that. I still have my hand raised for employees knowing our mission. I have experienced though other employees, my fellow coworkers, that have maybe jumped on a project and said like, hey, we totally are down to do this. And then when it's come to us, so I'm like, that's not really part of our mission. Not saying that we don't care about the community as a whole, but like, let's look at what our mission is, and like, is that going to help us get to our goal and help donors know that we're trying to get to achieve a certain goal?
Absolutely. In the chat, somebody said they just declined a grant because of mission creep. Can be really hard to turn down money that feels adjacent. We can often talk ourselves into a story of how certain work might be connected to our mission. I was at an organization that supported people living with type 1 diabetes, and the whole point of that organization was to build social connections. Now, the founder was a lobbyist and was excited to find some funding to open up an opportunity for advocacy work. And as the executive director and only staff member, I found myself just over my head in trying to get into this advocacy work. And it was really pulling away from the actual social connection activities that we were meant to do, that were part of our mission. And it was really hard when I said, I need to sunset this project and walk away. The founder wasn't very happy. He was frustrated, but ultimately, myself and the board realized that we needed to get back on mission. I call this out today because it's just important to ensure that all the actions that we take come back to our mission, our organization's purpose, and are headed towards that guiding star of our vision. And it can be a helpful thing to figure out, how do you revisit this in your board meetings and your staff meetings? I'd love to have folks put their organization's mission statement in the chat. I'll give you bonus stars if you can do it from memory. It's always great to see how other people capture the words that they use to tell their story. So I'm curious, what kinds of challenges do you face in bringing your mission into action? And I'd like for us to talk about this in an interactive way. I am going to post a link in the chat. To have us all join a Jamboard. Let me first pull it up on my screen so you know what I'm talking about here. Okay, so in just a moment, I'll give you a link to join this board, and it's sort of my virtual flip chart. If we were all in a giant ballroom together, I might give you a handful of sticky notes and ask you to add to this flip chart. Over here on the left-hand column, you can see this little sticky note graphic. When you go to the link and get on this page, you can click on that and create your own message. And then when you hit save, it will populate on the board and you can leave it there. You can even change the color if you'd like. So what I'm going to do now is put in the chat a link to this Jamboard. And I'll take this off my screen so you can just have one on your screen. But I'd love to have folks jump over there and write down a sticky note that represents some challenges that you face in your org in bringing your mission into action.
Does it seem like, Jamie, people are able to access it, the Jamboard?
Yeah, let me know. Oh, it says too many people are on. Wow, I've never had this problem before. I'll share on my screen for folks who aren't able to get in. You can see sort of what's happening there. If you leave your note, maybe you can log out and let others jump on for a moment. But what you see is there's some recurring themes that are happening here in terms of funding, leadership support, being so focused on grant requirements that it's really hard to step back and see what else is needed, having alignment across departments, having to do some education out in the world about what peering is about, being in rural communities, the stigma around the work. So many things that can make it really difficult to put that mission into action. And when we're trying to attend to these different things, get more funding, do that outreach and education, work on getting our board going and supporting our board, it can be really hard sometimes to take our activities into action and deliver on our services in the way that we initially envision when we first apply for a grant or when we, make that strategic decision to move forward with work. Thank you so much for your additions to this Jamboard here. I think it also just really speaks to the heavy lift of nonprofit work, and there might be some things in here that might be supported by some of that TA offerings that Chris offered earlier. But we really have to figure out some ways to ensure that our mission-led work continues to be put forward and that we can stay focused even in the face of all of those challenges to get the things done that we need to. By raise of virtual or real hands, how many of your organizations currently have a current strategic plan that has some time-based strategies for bringing your mission into action? Okay, some folks have a current plan. My guess is some of you might be working off of a plan that expired a couple of years ago, but you haven't had a chance to redo it. You may be new and not yet in the stage of your development to have done a strategic plan, or don't really have the time or folks to be able to put that in practice yet. Many new or small organizations don't have a formal strategic plan yet, but being able to set aside the time and leadership energy to create that strategic plan will really serve you well in the long run. It can help to make sure that those decisions are connected to your mission and vision, that you're thinking about things beyond funding to funding stream, and really holding that big picture in mind. If you don't have a strategic plan yet, or if you're working on a plan that's out of date, it looks like next month's speakers will be diving into approach to strategic planning. Is that right, Chris?
Yes. Next month will be strategic planning.
So I bring this up. Here, let me go here. In that, when you have a strategic plan in place, it really ends up being a roadmap for your organization to ensure that you are able to head towards your vision and put that mission into action. A strategic plan is created by the board and leadership. It's those big picture priorities that are often over several years, and it gives some definitions of what success looks like without getting into the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day work. Whereas a work plan is a visual overview of putting those organizational goals into action. So if you have an active strategic plan in place, a work plan can be the tool to make sure that you're putting that strategy into action. If you don't have a strategic plan, a work plan can be a way to ensure that you're carrying out the projects that you have funded, that you're working towards those annual goals, and being able to stay on course with the items that you have set out for the months ahead. This is an overview of some of the pieces that are involved in a work plan, and we're going to be diving into each of these here shortly. A work plan can also be used to carry out specific funded projects. If you have a grant project, you can use that as a roadmap for meeting your funders' expectations and deliverables. So what do we have in a work plan? The first piece is goals. So goals are really just the end results that you seek. And in a work plan, you really want to be able to describe your goals in a clear, concise summary of what you realistically plan to achieve. It's that big picture, that target that we have in mind. And then a strategy is your approach that you'll be taking to achieve that goal. So how you will accomplish the goals, how you will tackle getting to that end result. Objectives are the accountability markers that you'll be using to track your progress towards your goal. So this is the measurable steps that lead towards a project goal. And being able to measure what needs to happen on the way to fulfilling that goal will be really important to see if you're on track and understand when you might need to pivot. Tactics are the specific tools or techniques that you'll be using to execute on a strategy. And these can be very different per organization, per specialty, per staff member. You may have different folks on your team that are using different tactics to approach the same strategy, depending on what their role and expertise is. But this is really sort of the how you're getting to making sure that strategy towards your goal is put into action. We always want to hold in mind our budget and what funds we'll be paying for these activities. If there's restrictions on funds, that often comes up, particularly if we have government funding that might have some limits on ways that we can spend that money. And thinking about the big picture costs. We often think about the venue, the food, but we don't always think about staff time, some of the operations costs that might be behind needing to carry out that program in terms of like your email server, your lights, your utilities. What is the true cost of carrying out that project? And are we going to need to raise funds along the way to ensure that we can carry this out, or do we already have full funding in place? And is there any expected income from this activity? We also want to hold in mind whether there's any resources that we need to be thinking about ahead of time that will help us to carry out that plan. People outside of our staff or board, expertise that we might not have in-house that we need to turn to, access to information or audiences that we don't already have. So doing that upfront work will help to make sure that we're pulling in the resources that we need along the way. I'm curious how many of you have been a part of a project where perhaps the roles were poorly defined. Anyone have that come up where it was maybe unclear who's doing what? What were some of the consequences of those situations? Anybody willing to share?
Hi, I'm Stephanie from Nova Scotia. We lost our location for the food cupboard because we weren't prepared. And so now all the work that we went into doing that has to be redone. So we have to start from scratch.
Oh gosh, that's so hard. I'm so sorry to hear that. Thanks for sharing, Stephanie. Amber, did you have an example of being a part of a project where roles were poorly defined?
So we had one of our recovery festivals, and I went down with COVID, and our executive director was out of town for a family emergency. And for whatever reason, the person we put in charge did not define who was doing what for that event. And we had a very poor turnout, one of the poorest we've had in the 6 years that we've been open.
Oh gosh, that's so heartbreaking.
And you have to rebuild those connections again, because poor turnout at one of your main events means the community doesn't care right now. So you have to get back out there and kind of start over again.
That's a great point. We often think about the impact when we're on a team and we get frustrated with one another, or there's miscommunication internally. But when those cracks start to show up in community, or our constituents are impacted because of the poor planning and communication, it can really be harmful to our org's purpose. Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Sure. Mark Howard with Reality Check. We're addiction services in New Hampshire. I've actually just joined this board, literally. However, I was before I moved to New Hampshire, I was on an arts board, the arts community on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, for 3 years, and we had not. And this isn't project specific, but overall led to problems on all the projects where we had a new executive director who thought she was in charge, and we had a board president who wasn't willing to try and get her to, like, we weren't on the board wanted certain things and the ED wanted something else. And it was during COVID, there was all kinds of other problems. But the fact that we didn't have, the staff and the board were going in two different directions was a problem.
That's really common in nonprofits. I do a lot of work with executive leaders and board chairs to talk about those roles and responsibilities, what shared power looks like, who's responsible for what, because it gets really messy when two people are trying to take the lead, or there's lack of communication, or very different hopes and expectations of where the direction to lead. And so that it shows up all of the time. And so it's really important that when we're putting together a work plan, that we're holding roles and responsibilities in mind up front, that we're really taking some time to define who's going to do what, who will be responsible for what bodies of work, how we are going to communicate as a team. Sometimes it seems really obvious because different people have staff roles, but taking the time to get really clear on those responsibilities up front will really pay off as you execute your plan. Mapping a timeline. Often first drafts of timelines, especially if they're created by the visionaries of your team, might be really idealistic, and they might not always account for important considerations. It's really important when we're thinking about a timeline to build in assumptions of obstacles that might come up, possible delays along the way, so that we're not setting ourselves up for impossible deadlines or rushing our end results. And that's if you have control of the deadlines. Often we're working with funders or partners where there may be an external deadline that we're going to have to meet, and we don't have the power to shift those deadlines. So walking backwards in a timeline to ensure that you're giving yourself enough buffer that you won't be rushed at the end is another important way to sort of think about sequencing your tasks, looking at when will your team be available. We might be looking at one project, but if they have other projects going on, what is the overlapping pull on our staff or volunteers? How can we ensure that we're putting reasonable goals during different timelines that are going to be able to be executed? I'm curious, how many of you have used a Gantt chart for project planning? It's a visual map, sometimes in a spreadsheet or a grid format, where you can see when different tasks are projected to be done, and get sort of a visual of your project. Looks like some folks have experience with that. In a worksheet that I'll be sending out for you, I have an example Gantt chart, and I'll bring it up here in a little bit to show you. It can be a really helpful visual, and can sometimes be a nice way to realize, oh, we're expecting that everything's going to happen in March. There's no way that can happen. It can sometimes help to cue us into potential overload and be more thoughtful about our big picture timeline mapping. So we often think about deliverables as the final product that's due to our funder or our constituents or our partners, but there's really different types of deliverables that are needed along the way. When we're thinking about an internal process deliverable, it may be these tools that help you along the way. So perhaps a tracking spreadsheet or a database might be a deliverable that your team might be creating that's going to help you along the way. It might be a list of potential donors that's just an in-house starting point for the team to be able to do donor cultivation work. An external process deliverable might be the marketing materials that are going to be put out there to get folks to the event. Whereas an external project deliverable might be more of that final product, end of year annual report of what's happened at our organization this year. And so while we don't need to have the specific names in mind when we're thinking about deliverables, I do want to mention that it can be helpful to have some deliverable targets along the way that includes, what do we need as a team that's going to really help us? What tools are we going to need along the way to get to our final products, to our final deliverables for both in-house and for anybody that we might be working with or the constituents that we're serving? Any questions about anything that I've talked about so far? I know I've been flying through some of this content. we'll have a chance here to put some of these things into a case study. My hope is that might help bring some of these definitions and pieces of a work plan to life. Okay, so here we have a case study. I'm going to call this RCO, the Emerging Change Makers. So here we have an example organization. They've been a volunteer organization for the past 2 years. They were founded by a passionate peer counselor that wanted to build peer counseling recovery services in a rural county that previously didn't have any of these services. So the founding board were friends of the founder, folks with lived experience, or a close connection to the recovery world, but with little nonprofit leadership experience. They've been learning and figuring things out as they go in terms of running the nonprofit. Thanks to the enthusiasm and the powerful storytelling that the founder and the board has, a local mental health agency has offered to partner with them, a mental health agency that has been looking to expand their services to include broader behavioral health services and want to be able to partner to offer peer counseling, and is in talks for a contract to get this program off the ground with the Emerging Change Makers. So the volunteer board recognizes that there's a real opportunity for growth. They also know that there's certain limits to their current team. And so they conducted a strategic planning process to really set a clear roadmap for themselves of where they need to head to bring these projects that are in line with their vision to life. And these were some of the strategic goals that came out of that strategic planning process. They want to raise a market rate salary funds to be able to hire their first paid staff member by the end of the year. They want to recruit 3 new board members that have legal, finance, and policy expertise by mid-year. And they want to build a website with detailed service menu and a client portal by the end of spring to help in launching this partnership work. So how do we take these strategic goals and put them into a work plan? The first is to isolate a specific goal and make a work plan specifically off of that goal. It could be a goal, it could be a project, but really those bodies of work that were talked about in these strategic goals are quite different. And we're going to need different strategies, different tactics, maybe even different team members to address these different goals. And so a work plan can help us get really specific and look at one goal or project or priority at a time. So here, in creating this work plan for the Emerging Change Makers, we'll start with this goal. They want to raise salary funds. They've done their research and they've figured out how much it's going to cost in their market to hire a executive director for their organization. And they want to be able to raise the money to get that staff member in place by the end of the year. So the strategy that they are going to take, or the approach that they're going to take to get there with this goal, is to cultivate private donor relationships. Now, there could be other strategies that your organization might use. They might have had a grant writing strategy. They might have wanted to do some creative contracting work with their community partner to see whether they might pay for staffing before the work gets off the ground, right? So you can have a variety of different strategies, but it's helpful to zoom in on what is the strategy we are going to try, and then how do we bring that strategy to life? What is the thing that we think is going to be our best pathway towards achieving that goal? And so from that strategy, they created these objectives. They want their board to host a summer fundraiser event with a target of, they want to net $20,000 at the end of that event. And each board member will either get donations from individual donors in their network, or they will give themselves, if they have the means to be able to give a donation that large, of $5,000 by October 31st. This is the very clear objectives. And you can see here, with objectives being this measurable step to lead towards your project goal, this is very measurable. We're going to know whether we hit these objectives or not, right? We want to ensure that when we set objectives that they're reasonable. These folks seem to think that they have enough people that can attend this event that they can raise $20,000. For nonprofits that I've been a part of, that might have been a really ambitious goal. For others, that might be a very small goal. So zooming in on what's realistic, what's timely, what makes sense, and how can we see how we're on track throughout the course of our project. And then the tactics are those tools and techniques that we're going to be using to accomplish that strategy. So in order to host this fundraiser, in order to do this get or give donor cultivation work towards cultivating these private donor relationships, we need to reach out through board networks. The board is going to have donor cultivation meetings with constituents that they think might be interested in learning more about the org and giving. And they're going to be doing some research to find out where are donors in their community that are already giving to like-minded causes that don't know about our org yet, that might be interested, that could be potential donors for us. And then they set their budget. They believe it's going to be $4,500 for not only the marketing and the meetings, but renting the venue, the supplies, the cost for the event. And they've identified that among their staff, they need to have these different roles. It's really going to own different key buckets of the work to carry it out. And then they create a timeline that parses out over the course of the year what needs to happen here. This is a quarterly timeline and a list. You might get more specific, either month by month, week by week, depending on your project. It doesn't have to detail every single step of the way, but you want to be able to see how you're going to be getting to your end result and have a plan for pacing that work over time. And then these are the hoped for deliverables through the project. And you'll see here in these deliverables that we do have some process deliverables as well as project deliverables. So that board network map, which is, really asking board members to think of anybody in their network that might be a possible interested donor, a donor prospects list that comes from some research of giving in like-minded communities. Those are going to be internal products that wouldn't be shared, publicly, but that will be useful tools along the way towards getting to those target goals, that target goal. And then some of these deliverables will be happening, at the conclusion, event evaluation. An annual report on donor engagement might be a public product that's shared with our community that might help engage other people as they see some of the successes that we accomplish over the course of this year. So this is how these are the categories of work plan that can be helpful in doing that work. I'm going to show you what this looks like in a different template. You'll be getting one of these emailed out to you. So this is a filled template for at a glance plan. Your work plan should really be able to be a map that you can access throughout your project, that isn't so detailed and so many pages that it's put on a shelf and nobody pays attention to it. And it can be a living, working document that can be modified over time if you find that different things come up along the way. You'll see at the top of this template, we have a space for you to clearly list your goal, the strategy, those objectives, and some big picture ideas about the tactics that are going to be taken towards those objectives and strategy, the overall budget, and any resources that might need. This org is aware of a philanthropist that's been really active in the recovery community, connected to many organizations. They want to take that person out to lunch and pick their brain a little bit and see if they know people that would be really interested in the mission work that they're doing. Here we can see an overview of team members named, the roles that are allocated for them, and what those higher level responsibilities will be for each team member, so that that's really clear up front who will be doing what. And then as a group, they started to map some of the key activities that will be happening along the way. This might be a little bit tricky to see, the writing's a little small, but you can see the task, who it's assigned to, a timeline, and some key deliverables that will be coming from those key activities along the way. So at the end, you have this one pager at a glance of what's happening with your work plan. In the Excel sheet that we will send out to you, I've included a couple of other things that might be of use in your work here. Let me share another screen with you. So you'll find that work plan on the first tab. And then there'll be a simple budget table that you can modify for yourself just to get a handle on what the project costs are, what the expected income might be. You know, if we start to do research and we realize that the venue is going to cost us $8,000, you know, that's going to really shift what we might be able to bring in. We might have to get really creative around that budget point if that were to become a challenge. So doing some of that initial budgeting and then being able to capture the actuals later too, if we're new to event planning, might help inform future work plans. And then I talked about that Gantt chart earlier, which is a visual piece of mapping out your timeline. So here I've taken those tasks that we had on the work plan and the assignments and started to put some key dates in so that visually you could see when different folks might be working on that. And this chart has a way for you to clock in how much of the way are you done with that activity, and it'll gray out when it's complete, so that you can see what's in process versus what's complete. While those tools aren't, you know, necessary, you may choose to do your timelining in a narrative form. A lot of folks have found that really helpful to have that bigger visual piece to see when we might have a lot of activities going on at the same time or conflicting. And you could use that Gantt chart to include all of the work that you're doing. You can do sort of project by project or goal by goal to also be able to see how, you know, is our staff overloaded because we're working on this goal and this goal and this goal, and somehow we've assigned all of our stuff in February. We might want to make some adjustments holding the big picture as well. Okay, so that was an introduction to the tool and an overview of what it might look like for us to put this into place with a specific organization. And now I want you all to have some practice engaging with these different categories and putting a goal into a work plan. So I've pulled this other goal, the second goal: recruit 3 new board members with legal, finance, and policy expertise. And I believe we had this set for by mid-year. So in just a moment, we'll have you break into some breakout rooms and start discussing, you know, what strategy does your group want to take? There might be several different strategies for this, but hone in on an approach that you think might be a good starting place. What kind of objectives would you need to get there? What are some tools and techniques that'll help you in achieving those objectives? What roles might be necessary? What are some of the deliverables along the way that would happen in creating that project? We're going to be doing this through the Jamboard. Let me pull that up and show what that looks like. Given that we had too many folks to enter it last time, what I think I might recommend is that one member of your team be the scribe and can pull that up, and the rest of the group can sort of talk through these categories, so we don't necessarily all have to be in the same board. But let me do a screen share to let you know what I was thinking here. So in just a moment, I'll give you the link for this. You can see the goal here. in the top left corner, you see an orange tab that says what group number. At the top of the screen, there's these arrows here that you can navigate to. Each of these pages is identical, except for that it has a different group number. So when you're assigned to the breakout room, before you hit join, notice what group number it says. And so if you're group 5, just scroll along until you find the page for group 5, and you can start editing these sticky notes that are here. You can click on that, add your group's thoughts, save it, and just work on your page to come up with a strategy, objectives, tactics, all of these different pieces towards that goal. Any questions before we move into that breakout room about sort of what we'll be doing in the small groups?
Jamie, how many groups did we land on? If we do 15, it would be about 5 per room.
Yeah, let's see. I have, I have 15 rooms available.
Perfect. And I'm just going to pause the recording while we get the breakout rooms set up, because we don't need this as part of the recording.
Could you share a little bit?
This meeting is being recorded.
Group 1, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your approach and what you were thinking about as you were tackling this goal for the emerging change makers? Who was in group 1?
I don't know what our group number was.
Does this Jamboard look familiar to anybody?
So it was, sorry, I have,
outreach
yeah, Amber, Barbara, Kia, and Tyler were in group 1.
Honestly, I was trying to figure out the technology the whole time. I'm sorry. Right.
No worries. Perhaps, so group 1, you had talked about creating an outreach committee. Tell me more about that strategy or what you were thinking about to get there.
This is Barb. I was there. We had technical difficulties with the board until like just a few minutes.
Sure, that's okay.
We signed out. So we actually spent a lot of time trying to unpack policy expertise to figure out if it would lead towards lobbying or whether this is policy expertise in terms of programmatic issues or things like that, sort of trying to pin that down because it makes a huge difference on all the other squares that we would have to fill out. And I don't even remember anybody mentioning an outreach committee. It just kind of popped up. It just popped up there, but I don't remember any conversation about it. And we did spend a lot of time unpacking where we could go in the community. And we recognize that because this is nationwide, our terminology is very different. How drug courts work in one state are different than how drug courts work in another. So what we landed on holistically is to start with professional organizations that represent those professions. So attorneys, any of the entities that work with pro bono, where attorneys can sign up to do pro bono work, things like that, you know, and try to find that overlap. And then we spent time talking about, do we really want an attorney on our board? The big hurdle for most attorneys is time. And they're very willing to, like, we have a attorney that partners with us and he does everything for us pro bono that we need, but he doesn't want to serve on our board. So
some of the activities along the way might be getting a little deeper clarity of what level of legal expertise we think we need. Do they just need familiarity with nonprofit management? Do we need a lawyer And so as these questions come up, as you're trying to drill down, it might prompt that there needs to be a whole board discussion about, are we looking for credentials? Are we looking for experience, or just some know-how? And I think that's a great example of like, what else might come up along the way when you're creating a work plan.
Along those same lines, the finance piece, we spent a lot of time talking about that because FASB, which is the governing or ruling organization that dictates how financial reports are to be drafted, and then with GAAP, there are different regulations for nonprofits as opposed to for-profit. Accounting practices and your bookkeeping and how the financial reports get created is very different for nonprofit. So there had to be some distinction that if we were going to have somebody on our board that they actually understood the nonprofit piece. And a lot of people don't realize how different it is, but it is.
Yeah, than the corporate environment.
Correct. So we spent a lot of time unpacking those things.
Thank you so much. I appreciate hearing about your process, Barbara. How about group 7? Who contributed to this Jamboard? Your target strategy was to look for people from a pool of those with lived experience. Anyone from group 7 want to share a bit about this piece?
Well, I guess I will. So yeah, our strategy was, since we are in recovery, looking for people with those backgrounds from a pool of people with lived experience in recovery, right? We were a little confused about say objectives and tactics. Yeah. So objective, investigate prospective board members, and tactics is recruit or invite them to be members.
So the objectives might be that you want to have a recruitment pool of 20 people that you think could be approached to try to get to your 3. So the objective, you want to be able to put a number to it. You want it to be measurable. And then the tactics might be, we're going to go out to our professional network. We're going to look at people who've sat on other boards. The tactics will start to get to how you're going to get there, like with the specific techniques. But for objectives, you want to get really measurable about what that might look like.
Okay,
and it's
so
sort of
like
like on the way towards the goal. Yeah.
Okay, and in budget and resources, we didn't have a budget. Board members aren't paid. I mean, the only budget would be, for example, the people that have to do the work of looking for them, right? And compiling all that stuff. And then what resources can they bring to the table? So they're, like you said, their expertise, and if they know other people, right, that they can also help us recruit. The timeline, we were thinking it should be prior to application for the 501c3, prior to operations, or to becoming a corporation. Key roles, since there were only 3, and we weren't sure, like, do we already have a board and we're just getting 3 more members, or is this the initial board, right? So we got the president or chair, the vice, and the secretary. And I think there's supposed to be one more, but we couldn't remember what that was. And then deliverables, basically the help with the running of a company, fundraising, making connections. What else? I think that's it. Well, and they determine like salaries and stuff like that. At least they do here, the ED's salary.
So in this example, the key roles might be the roles of the people who are on the recruitment process. So it might be that you do have an existing board. I realize that was maybe confusing. You might already have some board members, but you're looking to expand the board. So who might be the person who contacts those board prospects? Who might be the person who invites them to a meeting? Who might be the person who draws up a description of what we need out of a board member? And so the key roles there might be what you need to get those different folks on board, and then be able to put them into those positions. Thank you so
Okay.
much for sharing.
Thank you.
So I appreciate taking the time to just start to think, and certainly it's different when we're looking at someone else's goals, the goals that you have for your organization. You understand these intricacies, you understand what's really needed, where the pull is, what you already have in place versus what are the gaps or challenges along the way. So in some ways, I think this is almost harder to do with a hypothetical than with your own organization's work. When you get the template that asks you to pull these different things together that I shared earlier, you'll notice that there is a description of each of these to help remind you of what we mean by a goal, what we mean by a strategy, what we mean by objectives, and the slide deck can help clarify the distinction between those as well as you're putting those pieces together. So I'm curious, as you're thinking about putting together a work plan for yourself with some of the goals for your organization, what opportunities do you see in your organization for incorporating a work plan process like this? How might this be helpful to your team? Anybody willing to share thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll share real quick. I think it'll be very helpful just to kind of have a center point, to start. Because like right now, just starting out, this is just something that's brand new to me. So there's so much energy and like there's a million balls in the air. So this right here for me is just like, okay, this kind of brings it right to a center. So I've got a new place to start and focus from. So I really do appreciate that opportunity to be part of it. It's just pretty interesting.
Thanks.
This is Ken Collins in Gallup at the Hojo Center. This is going to be real useful to me because we just started a project about creating recovery housing here in Gallup. And as a part of that, we've got we're looking at purchasing 3 closed motels. So we're working on this with the Mortgage Finance Authority here in New Mexico. We have a real opportunity to do some really good things here. It's a combination of working and collaboration with different organizations here, couple of treatment programs, homeless shelter. So this is going to be real useful to me because really I don't have a clue on putting this together. So thank you very much. And I'm glad I'm here.
Thanks for sharing that example, Ken. Sometimes we have exciting projects that come up and it can almost feel overwhelming. Like, where do we start? And even just to have a framework, you could modify this framework over time if there's specific things that you always want to be proactive in planning. But it can have that grounding space of like, okay, we got to get the people on board. We got to figure out the budget. We got to figure it can be a step-by-step way to, as Nicole said in the chat, work smarter, be more efficient, keep on track, help to get that organized piece and create a framework of common understanding. If we're all referring to the same work plan, if we all have the same expectations of who's doing what, if we've all looked at the timeline and you need to get this to me before I can do this next activity, it can really be a place that the whole team can circle around as you're trying to bring these big ideas into life and bring them to action.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. And I'd just like to say I'll put my email address in the chat box. So if anybody's had any experience in creating recovery housing, transitional housing, we are a peer-run wellness center. So that's a real benefit to the success of this project. But if anyone has any ideas or would like to assist us here in Gallup with this, like I said, I'll put my email address in the chat box, and please get a hold of me because this is a real opportunity. We have a lot of stuff going on here. We're making a lot of progress, and this will just be icing on the cake right now. So thank you.
Ken. It looks like a few folks in the chat are already pinging you. That's what I love about gatherings like this opportunity to connect with other leaders who've been there, who've done that, who have some wise advice from the things that went wrong or went right in their process. I think the more that you can join in this and start to build community with folks that might be on the other side of the country but have walked in your shoes, I think it can be a really powerful opportunity to leverage each other's experiences into your own leadership opportunities. So what I'm going to do now is, let's see, just our last few minutes here. You have an assignment. I have some homework for you all. And that's to use the template to be able to do 3 organizational goals before we meet next. So we'll be meeting in a couple of weeks, and we will be emailing out in the meantime this work plan that I talked about. Chance for you to fill this in. I would do this 3 times. So have one goal that you work out, or one project if you don't have a strategic plan goal, and then fill this out again for another goal and see what it looks like for you to create a work plan for 3 goals in your organization. If helpful, you can use this budget tab, or you could cut and paste your own budget in here if you already have that worked out for some of your goals. If you want to play around with this visual timeline and putting in some tasks and some different dates, I'll tell you, you can scroll along the top here. This is every day and week. You can start to scroll, but if you click here and type in what week number you want to go to, it'll forward it to some future months. If you go to week 15, or if you want to go halfway through the year and go to week 32, it'll move you to later summer. So that's one piece of information about using this chart that might be helpful. But the main piece is to get this front page of the work plan completed for a couple of different goals. And then when we come back next time, we'll have a chance to share out what that process was like, the challenges that you might have faced along the way, questions that come up, because it's one thing for me to throw these definitions and for us to kind of think about this in theory. And it's another thing to really put it into place and figure out what that looks like for your own organization. So we'll have a chance to dive in deep, and hopefully we'll leave at the end of this month with a tool that's really helpful at the start of the year of putting some things into practice for you all. Questions? Johanna, did you have a question?
I have a question. If we have more than one person from our organization here, can we work on it together?
Absolutely. I would encourage that.
Great.
Actually, that would be wonderful. Or if there's other key people on your team that weren't able to be here, but that are a part of doing leadership and planning, if you can loop them in and draw on their insights together, that would be a wonderful process too, if you have time before the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And we'll be meeting here in just a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so the next session is January 24th. It'll be at the same time, depending on your time zone. So that's noon to 1:30 p.m. Central, 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and 10 to 11:30 a.m. Pacific. And like Jamie said, we'll be sending out the homework. So try to do 3 goals, fill this out 3 times. And then when we come back together, we can discuss like where their pain points, where their hangups, where there places where you got stuck. And if the need is high enough, through the Peer Recovery Center of Excellence, we could explore how to continue that learning. So like I said, this is our first workshop in the Learning Collaborative series. So we're really getting a sense of like, what kind of support do you need? It's not meant to be stressful, but actually to give you some tools to make your work a lot more easy. And like I said, it's so much easier to delegate when you have a clear vision of the whole project in one place. So we are at the end of the hour here. Thank you so much for spending this last hour and a half with us on building work plans. And we'll see you on the 24th. And if you could give me till tomorrow to get out the slide deck and the template, but I promise you it will come. So appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody.